I used to believe that if you loved your children hard enough, they would love you back the same way. That was the lie I built my entire life around. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 68 years old, widowed, and until 3 years ago, I lived in the same little white house in Columbus, Ohio, for over 40 years. That house held everything. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. The pencil marks measuring my children's heights on the kitchen wall. My husband Robert and I built our entire lives there. And in the end, my own children treated it like a prize to fight over before I was even dead. I had 3 children. Michael, the oldest. Sandra, my only daughter. And my youngest, Kevin. When they were little, people used to tell me I was lucky because they were such good kids. And honestly, back then, they were. Michael was quiet and responsible. Sandra was emotional but affectionate. Kevin was my baby. Charming. Funny. The kind of boy who could talk his way out of anything. I devoted my whole life to them. I worked double shifts as a hospital receptionist while my husband drove trucks across state lines for days at a time. There were years I barely slept. I packed lunches at 5 a.m., ironed school uniforms, attended football games half awake, and still managed to sit beside hospital beds whenever one of them got sick. When Michael wanted college, we took out loans. When Sandra got divorced at 32 and needed a place to stay, I welcomed her home with her 2 children. When Kevin crashed his car drunk at 24, we paid the legal fees because he deserved another chance. Everything we had went into those children. Everything. Robert died suddenly from a heart attack at 63. One moment he was mowing the lawn. The next, he was gone. 42 years of marriage ended in 15 minutes. People talk about grief like it's sadness. It's not. It's disorientation. It's waking up reaching for someone who no longer exists. It's hearing silence where a voice used to live. And after Robert died, something changed in our children too. At first, they seemed supportive. Michael called more often. Sandra brought casseroles. Kevin even started visiting every Sunday. But grief has a strange way of exposing people's true intentions. And slowly, the conversations started changing. It began subtly. Mom, the house is probably too much for you now. You shouldn't be alone at your age. Maybe you should think about downsizing. At first, I thought they were worried about me. Then Michael started asking questions about the deed. Sandra asked whether Dad had life insurance. Kevin joked one afternoon, "Who gets the house if you remarry?" They laughed. I laughed too. But something about it made my stomach tighten. The truth is, I wasn't helpless. Yes, I was older. Yes, my knees hurt. But I still cooked, cleaned, drove myself to church, and paid my own bills. What frightened my children wasn't my weakness. It was my independence. Because independent parents are harder to control. About a year after Robert died, I slipped on ice outside the grocery store and fractured my hip. That fall changed everything. Suddenly my children descended like a board of executives handling a corporate crisis. Michael started using words like liability. Sandra cried dramatically about my safety. Kevin insisted I needed professional care. Professional care. Such a clean phrase for abandonment. I stayed temporarily at a rehabilitation facility while my hip healed. And honestly, I hated every second of it. The smell of disinfectant. The constant television noise. The loneliness. Most residents sat staring at walls for hours like they were already halfway gone. I promised myself I would recover quickly and go home. But my children had other plans. One afternoon, Michael arrived carrying paperwork. He sat beside my bed with the same expression his father used to wear while discussing taxes. Careful. Calculated. He said, "Mom, we think assisted living might be best." I laughed because I genuinely thought he was joking. Then I realized he wasn't. I looked at my own son and said, "I'm going home." Sandra avoided eye contact. Kevin sighed dramatically like I was being difficult. And that's when I understood something horrifying. They had already decided my future without me. The arguments lasted for weeks. I begged them. Actually begged. I said I could hire part-time help. I said I could install safety rails. I said I would do physical therapy every day. None of it mattered. Because this was never truly about my health. It was about convenience. I had become an inconvenience. Eventually, they moved me into a nursing home 40 minutes away from my neighborhood. 40 minutes. Far enough that visits became optional. Close enough to ease their guilt. The first night there, I cried so hard I made myself sick. Imagine spending decades raising children only to end up alone in a tiny room with beige walls while strangers decide when you eat and sleep. That room didn't feel temporary. It felt like a waiting room for death. At first, my children visited regularly. Michael came every other Sunday. Sandra brought the grandchildren occasionally. Kevin promised he'd take me out soon. But over time, the visits faded. Birthdays became phone calls. Phone calls became text messages. Then silence. Meanwhile, something else increased dramatically. Their interest in my house. Michael wanted to rent it out. Sandra wanted to sell it immediately. Kevin wanted his share early because he was behind on bills again. They fought constantly. Over my house. While I was still alive. One afternoon I overheard Sandra whispering outside my room. She didn't know I was awake. She said, "If Mom declines mentally, we'll need power of attorney." Declines mentally. Like I wasn't a human being anymore. Just paperwork waiting to happen. That conversation changed me. Completely. Because for the first time in my life, I stopped seeing my children as extensions of myself. I saw them as adults making choices. Cruel choices. And once you see people clearly, you can't unsee them. There was one person at the nursing home who changed everything. Her name was Dorothy. 76 years old. Sharp as a blade. Her children never visited either. One evening she told me, "Stop waiting for people to become who they should have been." That sentence hit me like lightning. Because I had spent my entire life making excuses for my children. Michael's coldness. Sandra's selfishness. Kevin's irresponsibility. I kept blaming stress. Divorce. Money problems. Anything except the truth. The truth was simple. My children loved what I gave them more than they loved me. A few months later, Michael visited with a real estate agent. An actual real estate agent. Without asking me. He walked through my house taking measurements while I sat in the passenger seat feeling invisible. That night, I cried harder than I had since Robert died. Not because of the house itself. But because I realized my children were emotionally burying me before I was gone. So I made a decision. And that decision shocked everyone. Including me. I contacted an attorney. Privately. I changed everything. The will. The deed. The power of attorney. Everything. My children expected obedience. Instead, they awakened survival. Now before you judge me, let me explain something. I didn't cut them off because of money. I cut them off because of dignity. There's a difference. I could survive loneliness. But I could not survive becoming property in my own children's eyes. Over the next year, I quietly rebuilt my life. Physical therapy strengthened my hip. I made friends at the nursing home. I started reading again. Laughing again. Living again. And during that time, my children barely noticed. Because they were too busy fighting each other. Michael accused Kevin of wanting cash. Kevin accused Sandra of manipulation. Sandra accused both brothers of greed. It became vicious. They stopped speaking to each other except to argue about me. About my possessions. About inheritance. Sometimes they forgot to ask how I was doing entirely. Then came the Thanksgiving disaster. The moment everything exploded. My children arrived at the nursing home pretending to organize a family dinner. But within 20 minutes they were arguing loudly in the common room. Residents stared. Nurses exchanged uncomfortable glances. And there I sat in my wheelchair listening to my children scream about who deserved my house. Michael shouted, "I handled Dad's funeral." Sandra screamed, "I sacrificed years helping Mom." Kevin yelled, "You both think you're better than me." Not one of them noticed I was crying. Not one. Because greed makes people blind. That night, after they left, Dorothy rolled her wheelchair beside mine and said quietly, "Well, now you know." And she was right. I finally knew. 6 months later, my lawyer came to the nursing home. We signed the final documents privately. When he left, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. Because for the first time since Robert died, my future belonged to me again. I passed away? No. That's the funny part. My children assumed they had time. Time to manipulate. Time to pressure me. Time to control everything. But life doesn't work that way. Because shortly after changing everything, I improved enough to leave the nursing home entirely. And when I told my children I was moving back home with live-in assistance, they looked horrified. Not relieved. Horrified. That reaction told me everything. Michael asked immediately, "What about the house?" Sandra said, "Are you sure that's wise?" Kevin looked angry. Not concerned. Angry. Because my return home ruined their plans. 2 years later, I'm still alive. Still drinking coffee on my own porch. Still watering Robert's roses. And do you know the most ironic part? The people who truly cared for me in the end weren't my children. It was Dorothy. My caregiver Maria. The nurses. The neighbors who checked on me. Sometimes family is biological. And sometimes family is simply the people who treat you like you matter. As for my children, they eventually learned what I changed in my will. And let's just say, the silence afterward was deafening. Michael didn't speak to me for 8 months. Sandra cried and called me vindictive. Kevin accused me of choosing strangers over family. But they were wrong. I didn't choose strangers over family. I chose respect over exploitation. There's a difference. If you're listening to this while caring for aging parents, or while becoming elderly yourself, please hear me carefully. Never surrender your dignity just because people share your blood. Love should not require humiliation. And aging does not erase your humanity. You are not a burden because you grew old. You are not disposable because you need help. And if people only value you for what you own, then they were never protecting you. They were protecting their future inheritance. This has been Toxic Family Files. And remember, some people start counting your possessions long before they start mourning your absence.